Guys, do either of you have a flashlight or something that could make my face brighter? I have no color in front of me. Yeah. Hey. Okay, you can't stay in here because you start barking.
This?
Nope. What if I did this? It's just gonna be what it is, I guess. Thank you.
It doesn't look bad.
Okay, great.
Come on, Trinity, come on. Drink. Come on, Trinity. What should I do, Trinity? Mom, what should I do, Trinity?
I guess I'll just stay here. Is she downstairs with you?
Yes.
Okay.
Let me just get up. Come on, Trinity.
So everyone, my name is Abby Grasso. I have the great privilege, if I haven't met you, of being the executive director of our NAMI Montgomery County affiliate. The special part about NAMI is that there are over 600 state organizations and affiliates across our country. And while each is mighty in its own way, we are always stronger together. And over the last several months, as we've had heightened awareness to the need for equality and diversion and compassion in our communities, we feel that we needed to have a conversation. And we're lucky enough today to have a great NAMI friend in Michigan, Mr. Kevin Fischer, who offered to any affiliate across the country to start that conversation for our communities. So with that, I'm going to take that over, or I'm going to turn this over to Kevin. I thank each of you for making this a priority in your day and joining us. And after Kevin's presentation, there'll be some time to hopefully interact as well as we can over Zoom. I'll be managing the chat box. So if you have questions, I'll be kind of fielding those to Kevin, and you know, we'll again start that conversation so that we can build a community that supports everyone. So with that, Kevin, I'm gonna turn this over to you, and just from the bottom of our hearts, thank you for being here today to start that conversation.
Thank you, Abby, and thank you all for taking the time to be on and for having me today. I think this is an incredibly important conversation to have, and for me personally, I've always been a very strong believer that, one, there's a lot of similarity or parallel between the fight for equality, racial equality, the conversation around eliminating the stigma of mental illness. I think there's a lot of synergy and parallel to that conversation. And so a number of NAMI state executive directors asked if there was somebody of color willing to come forward and have this conversation. Quite frankly, I've never been really outspoken about race relations, though I very much believe that the United States has had a huge racial disparity issue for many, many centuries, quite frankly, if you want to go back 400 years. And I think it's to our detriment. I think together, we are stronger together. I very much believe that, and I believe very much in equality. And having said that, I want to share my screen. I thought I had it set up. And Abby, for some reason, I am not getting my PowerPoint presentation. So bear with me. I don't know.
Kevin, is it the one you sent to me?
Yes.
How about I see if I can pull it up for you?
Okay.
Again, always stronger together. Hang on one second.
Forgive me, I've got a really goofy laptop that's a tablet and a laptop, and I'm gonna try to get out of it, which inverts me, and see if I can pull it up as well, because I have it here. It looks ready to go. Zoom meeting. Okay, so I'm back with you. See if I can do it this way. There it is. That's what I want to share. Okay, hang on. I think I got it. No, I have to invert myself again.
You're up. Okay, I have it as well if you need to switch.
This is so weird. Okay, I think we're back. So thank you. And one of the things that I'm very open about is I am not the most technologically inclined person on the planet. So, and I guess, you know, I'm famous for disclaimers. And my first disclaimer is, one, I am very casual. I'm probably the most unexecutive executive director in the country. I am much more comfortable in t-shirts and tennis shoes than I am in a suit. I gave up my corporate life a long time ago. But my other disclaimer is I'm going to go through some slides, and I'm going to try to go through them probably in like 20, 25 minutes and give us some time to have a conversation, because I want us to, I think it's really important that we have a conversation, that I not do all the talking. But lastly, I have not been anointed to speak for all Black people in the United States. So I want to be careful and get that out there, because I'm just not. But I try to bring a reasonable perspective to it. I did one of these calls a couple weeks ago, and one of the criticisms was that I wasn't militant enough, and I'm not a militant person. So, and I don't feel there's a need to. I think this needs to be an engaging, collaborative conversation, and I don't feel a need to intentionally offend or rile anybody. I will make my points. I'm not meek about making my point, but I'm very open to having a conversation. So with that, I'll get started. And I'm going to start with this. I've been the executive director for NAMI Michigan for a little over 6 years now. In my previous professional life, I'm a retired businessman. I was a global sales manager. I worked for UPS for 20 years. I was a retail buyer for a number of retail stores for a couple of years. Like many of you, I got involved with NAMI and this whole issue of mental health advocacy and activacy when my oldest son, Dominique, in 2007, at 20, was diagnosed bipolar schizophrenic, which came as a complete surprise to our family and was devastating. And we realized very quickly, like most people, we knew nothing about the mental health system. We knew nothing about treatment plans. We knew nothing about what his future might look like. And we floundered around trying to figure that out. Thought we got it under control. And unfortunately, at one point, Dominique started doing so well in early 2010 that he decided he didn't need his medication anymore. He didn't need to go to treatment anymore. He could do it all on his own. I see some heads nodding. We all have the same story. But unfortunately, on June 27th of 2010, Dominique quietly excused himself from his mom's kitchen and went in the basement and hung himself. So I lost my son at 10 years ago last month at the age of 23. It was devastating. And one of the very quick myths that I dispel with people of color is, there are a lot of people that, unfortunately, in the African-American community. One, we don't seek mental health care as we should, and we'll get into that. But the other thing is there are many people in the African-American community who don't, for some reason, believe that Black people die by suicide. I beg to differ. So that's a little bit about my background. I came to NAMI, again, as a volunteer. I was a volunteer board member at my state office for a couple of years. And in early 2014, I had the opportunity to meet with our state Department of Health and Human Services director, a gentleman named Jim Haveman. And I didn't pay much attention to it at the time because, again, and maybe to my fault, race is not always first and foremost on my mind. I am used to, unfortunately, and this is one of the unfortunate byproducts of, if you want to call it systemic or institutional racism in the country, but I have gotten very used to being the only African-American in the room in most of my professional and adult life. So when we're meeting with Mr. Haveman and my fellow board members, at the end of the meeting, he held me back. Now, Jim Haveman is a 70-something-year-old at that time, white-haired white man. And he holds me back at the end of the meeting, and he says, "Kevin, NAMI is too white an organization, and you need to do something about that." And it really kind of knocked me back a little because I hadn't really thought about it. And at that time, I had no thought of becoming executive director and following this path. I joined NAMI trying to gain understanding for myself about my son's illness and his death by suicide and those kinds of things. So not knowing a couple months later, I would become the executive director. And so that gives me kind of a unique entrance into this. And as Abby and I were talking a few weeks ago, it dawned on me as we've started having these conversations about race and equity in the US over the last couple months, that I believe I am the only African-American male state executive director in the country for NAMI. Now, having said that, that doesn't mean that I think NAMI is a racist organization, because I don't. I think there are many reasons why things are the way they are. I look forward to us becoming a more diverse organization because we need it. I think that's one of many reasons, as I alluded to earlier, about why so few African Americans and other minorities seek behavioral health care. And it's because people need and like to see people who look like them. So, having said all that, I was very happy to see that our new CEO, Dan Gillison, issued a statement back at the beginning of May where he said, America needs to recognize that racism is a public health crisis. I've never really thought of it that way until I heard him articulate it that way, but I will tell you that as a Black male, and I'm 55 years old, it is an enormous weight to carry when you're, frankly, a person of color in this country. And it's for a lot of reasons, and it manifests itself in many, many ways. But I absolutely agree with him. As soon as I saw that statement, I said, it's a public health crisis. And not just for African Americans. I think it's a crisis for everybody. But again, I'm one of those people who believes very much that we all benefit by equality. And we'll talk a little more about that. So over the last couple of months, I have picked up, and I probably spend way too much time on social media, but I picked up a number of memes, and I want to share them with you. And I'm not going to get too deep into them, but this is the way I look at this issue of race in America. It's not black versus whites. It's black versus racism. And people are confusing the two. We're such a polarized country right now. And it's either black or white or Democrat or Republican or male or female or gay or straight. And I truly believe that we can respect each other's differences. We can actually even kind of grow on each other's, on the differences that we bring to the table. But for me, it's not a black versus white thing. And I'll pause here for a second to tell you, I grew up in a little town called Highland Park, and Highland Park, Michigan is only 2.5 square miles around, and it is literally surrounded by the city of Detroit. My parents were not very formally educated. My dad had a 6th grade education. My mom completed the 10th grade. My dad worked in a factory. My mom was a housekeeper. And so I don't come from a silver spoon kind of background. But my dad, didn't talk a lot about his time as a veteran. He served in World War II. The little that I recall him talking about, it was not a very pleasant experience for him. I know race played a role, and one of the things that I'm most grateful to my father for, and I lost my dad at 15, when I was 15 years old because he had a bad heart. But one of the things I'm most grateful for is that while I know he experienced some bad things, he absolutely refused to pass hate and anger on to me. We were the first African-American family on our street, and the neighbors' kids, the dad would tell them, "You're not allowed to play with the black kids. If you do, you're going to get a whooping." But when he went off to work every day, his kids came over and played with us anyway. And one of the things my dad said to me, and forgive me because you'll hear me refer to my dad many times, one of the things my dad said was, if grown folks stayed out of kids' business, the world would be a better place. Because hate is learned. It's not innate. You're not born with it. It's taught. And, my dad, he just watched us, and he said, kids will play together. Race didn't mean anything to us. One of the other things, and this one really resonates with me because I have people who I've known for many, many years we're all somewhat uncomfortable about this conversation of race, but I've noticed more and more on social media and in direct conversations that I've had with people, quite frankly, friends of mine who are white. And I'm a little, I don't like saying that, since if you go back to the killing of George Floyd, there's been a lot, of course, talked about race relations. And one of the things that I've heard people say a lot is that it's an uncomfortable conversation for white people. It's an uncomfortable conversation for everybody. And so I don't like referring to people as white people or black people. So forgive me if I fumble around that. But some of my white friends that I've known for many years really feel threatened by this conversation of equality. And so I came across this meme that said, equal rights for others does not mean fewer rights for you. This is not a pie. I'm not trying to take anything from you. I am one of those people who has always firmly believed what my dad ingrained in me, which was all I ask for is an equal opportunity. And I am willing to compete for anything, whether it is a job, sports field, whatever the case may be. I'm always willing to compete. It should not be that my race is what holds me back, or the color of my skin. And that shouldn't happen for you either. I just came across this photo literally just yesterday. So Abby, I'm one of those people you'd never trust with a presentation, a PowerPoint, because I will fidget around with it until the very last minute. But I came across this picture yesterday and I had to put it in here because it says, "Men of quality do not fear equality." And I think it's really just that simple. I don't know why there's a fear of equality in this country. Again, I don't speak for all Black people, but speaking for myself, I'm not trying to take anything from anybody. I just want the right to earn a living and take care of my family and provide and live the American dream like everybody else. And if I fail to do that, if I fail to put the work in, if I fail to have the knowledge to compete, then that's okay. But the color of my skin should not exclude me from anything. And this is another one that I kind of favor. It says, "Racism persists as long as we maintain comfortable silence." I've seen a couple conversations or witnessed a couple conversations over the last few months, and I'll be honest, I'm a little put off when I hear Black activists saying, "We're asking for white America's help." I hope I don't offend anybody. That's not the position that I'm coming from, because I believe equality benefits us all. I'm not asking you for a handout. I'm not asking you to give me anything except for a level playing field. So everybody might not agree with me on that, but that's where I'm coming from. And comfortable silence, there's another one that I didn't put up that kind of speaks to this photo as well, that says you have to pick a side. If you come to the conclusion that I'm just going to sit on the sidelines on an issue like this, then you're really choosing the side of the oppressor, whether that's your intention or not, because historically, what we have learned is that oppressors benefit from silence. Bullies benefit from silence. And so if you are one of those people who say, "In my heart, I don't agree with this, but I don't want to offend my neighbor, I don't want to offend my coworker, I'm not willing to take this up myself," then silence benefits the oppressor. And the oppressed can never change their situation without changing the heart, the mind, the intent of the oppressor. So we talk a little bit about demographics, and Abby and I were talking about this, and some of the other affiliates that I've been on this call had this conversation with. I was on with some folks from Washington State a couple of weeks ago, and it's a small community that's like 99% white. They sent me their demographics. And I live in a small township just west of Detroit called Plymouth Township, Michigan. And I said, so I had a good idea what my demographic was, but I wanted to pull it up and include it. So where I live in Plymouth, Michigan, it is 94.5% white. It is 0.07% African American. So I am one of the very few, and we don't have a huge population. I don't know what it is, maybe 20, 30,000, but it could be more than that. But, you know, as my professional life, because I've done relatively well, and I don't say that with any sense of ego, but I've had a relatively successful business career. I've been able to live in nice areas. And in those nice areas, the demographic tends to be predominantly white and very small percentage minority. In the community that I live in now, I have not been attacked. Nobody's given me the finger rolled down the window and called me the N-word or anything. In the community that abuts this, when I moved in this area about a little over 20 years ago, I will tell you that I've experienced racial profiling by law enforcement. I've had them follow me around and I knew they were running my tags. I've never had them pull a gun on me or put their knee on my neck. But and I, really briefly, I remember a situation where the police, every Saturday morning, I did most of the grocery shopping in my home. And every Saturday morning, I go to a couple grocery stores and I would notice the local police car following me. And so one morning, I waited until we were approaching a traffic light and I had an opportunity to, at the last second, slide over into the next lane, forcing the police officer to pull alongside me. And so when he did, I just rolled my window down and said, "Good morning, officer. How are you?" He said, "Fine." And I just literally said, "Look, my name is Kevin Fischer. Here's my address. I recently moved to the community. I'd only been here, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 months. And I said, I noticed you following me. I've seen you before. And I just want you to know that I'm a member of the community. You're wasting your time." And from that time on, every time I saw that officer, if I passed him in the grocery store, he would literally stop and talk to me. And I don't want to say we had a friendship, but we had a respect for each other and understanding. So again, I believe dialogue. I don't believe you have to curse everybody out to get your point across. I found this, and we talk a lot about racism, and I found this kind of graph that I like to utilize because we talk about internalized racism, interpersonal racism, institutional racism, and systemic racism. I think one of the biggest problems we have in America with race is, quite frankly, and again, I hope not to offend anybody, I come from a position, again, that my dad taught me, which was that most people are good people. And, but there are good people who are not willing to take a stand or don't think this is my fight. I respectfully disagree with that because I think racism is such a big problem in the United States that it really hurts us all. As a country, as a culture, as a community, I think it hurts us all. I said it before and I'll continue to say it till the day I die. I believe there's value in respecting our differences. I think it's a little disingenuous when I hear people say, "I don't see color." I don't believe that. I don't know how you can't see color. But I think we can respect the differences that each other has and move on. I have personally experienced racism at almost every level, but I am one of those people who understands, unfortunately, that as a person of color, I have to work harder sometimes. And as a person of color, things are not always going to be fair. But when I look back at what I know my parents went through, my ancestors went through, I caught a little bit of John Lewis's funeral service on CNN today, for what my predecessors went through to get me to this point. Working a little harder than the guy next to me is a small price to pay. It's not fair. It's not right, but it's a small price to pay, where I haven't gotten beaten on Bloody Sunday like John Lewis did. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. In the behavioral health world, we know that only about 43% of Americans in a given year who need mental health care receive it. But if you're a member of a minority class like African Americans or Hispanics, you can cut that number in half. And there are many, many reasons for that. Some of it has to do with access to care. Some of it has to do with being properly diagnosed and receiving culturally competent services. Some of it is our responsibility as well. And I do believe, even though we can have the conversation about the history of racism in this country, And I think it's a conversation that needs to be had and has to be had. But I also think we have to move forward at some point. And so I'm one of those, I don't have all the answers. I don't know if reparations are the right thing to do. I don't know how you figure it out, calculate it. Do I know that we've been economically disadvantaged? Absolutely. I'm not that smart. But what I do believe is I can control what I can control. And I have always been willing, again, to say, you know what, I'm willing to work hard for what I want so I can provide a good life for my family. I don't bother anybody, and I don't want anybody to bother me. And I'll say this, and again, with some humility, I'm not the kind of guy you want to bother either, because even though I sound really nice, and somebody, like I said, on the last call said that I wasn't militant enough, I will fight for what I believe in, and I will defend myself and my family, and I'll protect my rights, and I will do all of those things. But I don't have to be outwardly, I guess, aggressive or overtly aggressive. But I do believe, having said that, that I, as a Black man, and I, quite frankly, again, I don't get to speak for all Black people, but I believe we as Black people have to take a responsibility to say, you know what, I'm going to do the best that I can, and I'm going to bring the best that I have to the table. And when it's clear to me that race is what held me back, then I will fight that fight. But I can't just sit on the sidelines and say, you owe me, you owe me, you owe me, and wait for you to hand me something. Because whether I believe that or not, history has taught me that's not going to happen. So it's pretty much a waste of my time. I just mentioned, the disparities or the challenges that minorities face in seeking, mental health care, less access to treatment, less likely to receive treatment, lower rates of health insurance, bias in the system, higher levels of stigma, culturally insensitive system. One of the things that we talk a lot about in the African American community when we talk about access to mental health care is that there's not a lot of people of color that are psychiatrists, psychologists, social workers, and on going on. And while that is true, I also very much believe that I can't let that be a barrier. When I went through this with my son, I could not let it be a barrier that we couldn't find a qualified male psychiatrist. As long as I felt like we found competent care for him, then I have to work with what I had access to. And so I urge people of color, I'd love to see more of us in the field, but if you have a loved one who needs mental health care, and if you're in a community where you just don't have a person of color available to you, don't let that stop you from getting care for yourself or your loved one. You do the best you can, because you only hurt yourself when you decide that I'm just going to opt out until that's available to me, because you don't know when it's going to be available. You've all heard the numbers in Michigan is very consistent with the country. COVID has shown us that in the African American community, we only make up about 14% of the population here in Michigan, as well as in the country, but we represent over 30% of the COVID cases and over 40% of the deaths. And there are the same reasons that from the previous slide where I talked about access to care and insurance and all of that. African Americans are less trusting of the health system. But one of the things that really bothered me when back in January, late January, early February, when COVID was really coming to light, sometimes we're our own worst enemy. And in the African American community, and there are nationally syndicated radio shows that I listen to where the Black host was saying, well, Black people can't contract COVID because of our skin pigment. And we heard that back in the HIV/AIDS era, and we've heard it so many times with Ebola and everything. Again, sometimes we're our own worst enemy, and we don't heed the health warnings from the experts and the doctors. And as a result, we don't take it seriously and we end up hurting ourselves. And so, again, there are many, many systemic reasons why we are distrusting and all of those other things, access to care. But we have to stop in our own community making statements like that and as a joke, because people are listening to that and they don't take it seriously. And here in Detroit and Michigan, when we first went to our shelter in place executive order from the government, there were large parties of given by African Americans in public parks that the police were trying to break up, where it was hundreds of people. And I'm like, you're exposing yourself to this virus, and it's a novel virus. There's so many unanswered questions in the African American community. And again, for my African American friends that might be on the call, don't mean to offend you either, but you know, as I grew up in the 70s and 80s, there used to be this saying, live fast, die young, make a good looking corpse. If you aspire to that philosophy, God bless you. I don't. I want to live a long, fruitful life. And so, and for a number of reasons, my previous career where I was required to get a physical every year and all of that, I made that a part of my ritual. So I do take those things very seriously. And I think we should, because again, we can't, there's no pill somebody's going to be able to hand us. We know that we live with a lot of pre-existing health conditions that we need to get over. So we can't afford to ignore the health experts and ignore these kinds of warnings. Again, Dan Gillison, and I won't read it all. Dan Gillison made this statement back, I believe it was in early May, where he talked about how NAMI believes we need to be a diverse and inclusive and equitable organization. He was very transparent about, and Abby may remember this, as we go to the Executive Director Leadership Council every year. For the 6 years that I've been an executive director, we've been talking about improving or increasing diversity at NAMI as a national organization. Frankly, we haven't done enough about it. And that is true of many, many organizations in the United States. Since Mr. Floyd's killing, there have been a number of large companies that we all see national commercials and ads where they talk about improving equity. But when you look at those companies, are you just making a statement for marketing purposes, or are you really living it? And for example, Nike, which is one of my favorite companies, since I love wearing sweats, they were one of the first companies that came out with this huge ad campaign. And it took a couple of days for reporters to look at their board of directors and say, you talk about equity and inclusion, yet you don't have one person of color on your board. The vice president of Adidas resigned recently because she made a public statement that this conversation about race was nothing but noise. So when reporters went and looked back at the Adidas board, or actually corporate office, they found, I think it was less than 4% of all the employees at their corporate office were minority. It's not enough to make a statement. One of the things that encourages me that change is coming this time on the heels of George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery, and unfortunately so many others that have died at the hands of racially motivated people, is when you see the marches on TV, there are as many white people participating as there are Black. And for me, I look at it like, this is our generation's Bloody Sunday. This was what, the folks who were crossing the Edmund Pettus Bridge in 1965 experience. And again, I hate using this terminology, but it was an awakening for white America because it was an opportunity for the entire country to see the brutality of racism on television. We experienced that again 2 months ago when George Floyd was murdered. I think white America, the conscience of white America said, you know what? Maybe we didn't want to believe this was true, but it's right here in front of us. And I absolutely am proud that people got off their couch and said, this is not good enough to believe that it's not happening or to want it to not be true, but we have to get up and get involved. So marching and protesting is all good, but the question that I'd ask you to ask of yourself is, what are you willing to do beyond that? What's happening at your workplace? What about your friends and the people you go to church with and your kids' friends? When you hear them making those kind of racist statements, what are you willing to do? Because that's where the change is going to come. I'm not going to go through the rest of the statement because we're getting short on time. And Abby, I really want to open it up and have some dialogue. If there are questions of me or statements, I like us to spend this remaining, 20 minutes or so that we have and have a conversation. Everybody's got their video off. I like to see faces. So can we unmute, or is everybody muted themselves? And you want to just hear me ramble on, or are we going to have a conversation?
I think starting the conversation is so important because we have to learn from each other. And Kevin, the stories that you've shared, and I know you didn't share the story about the UPS experience, or I apologize, a place you used to work.
No, I'm going to get to it.
But, you know, I've seen the lack of cultural acknowledgement with providers, just as you were sharing. There are not a lot of Black, brown, minority providers providing services to people that look like them so that they can go and feel supported and understood through their culture in mental health treatment. Sometimes not in, you know, cardiology or other treatments as well. But when I came to NAMI about 4 years ago, a young woman came to me at we were at like a wellness fair at a Jewish synagogue, and she said, I am a woman, she was a beautiful young Black woman, and she said none of her family believed that she had anxiety, she had nowhere to go, and she really wanted to educate her community for people to know, breaking that stigma down, that mental health conditions are no different than physical health conditions, and letting people know that they're not weaker for needing different help. So I just, you know, as I said to you when I reached out, starting this conversation is so important. And we need to, in our Montgomery County and regional communities, know how to support people the best way, because nobody's going to want supported the exact same way.
Yeah.
And, you know, we want to make sure that we have support groups and education available if people want them in the ways that they want them.
So, and great point, Abby, and you and I had this conversation a few weeks ago. It's about building trust. And the conversation that I had with the folks in Washington State a couple of weeks ago, one of the questions was, how do we grow NAMI outreach in communities of color? And they were very honest with me, and I've experienced it here in Michigan. They were very honest with me by saying, we don't feel like we'd be well received. It would be such an uphill battle. And I remember telling you a story, and some of you, well, everybody's heard of the Flint water crisis, right? So Flint is in Genesee County, which is 75 or so miles away from me. And I have family in the Flint, Saginaw area. Our affiliate there, Genesee County NAMI affiliate, has been run primarily by an all-white group, and quite frankly, a group of older people. who frankly, I'm very fond of. Some of them have aged out and stepped down from leadership roles, and we had a new affiliate president, a young lady in her, I don't know, maybe late 30s, early 40s, and she took over a couple years ago, and she called me and she said, Kevin, I want to increase our outreach in utilizing the Ending the Silence programs in the Flint school system. But she said, Kevin, they're not going to want to hear from a white girl like me. And so she was very careful, politically correct, and just kind of walking on eggshells. And she said, would you mind coming with me and visiting the schools and the administration? And she was very quick to say, I don't mean to offend you. You're not offending me. I understand that, and here's what's really weird. In my experience, it is easier for me as a Black man to come into a white community and talk about mental health care, for example, than it is for a white person to come into a Black community. And it has to do with the lack of trust, quite frankly, in the Black community. But I told her, of course, you're not offending me. And I said, I will come with you every day and help you build those relationships and kind of tear down some of those barriers. The Genesee County affiliate has become one of the most diverse. Their board is much more diverse now. Their membership is much more diverse. They're much more active in that community. But what started it was simply a recognition that there was a need and a desire to do it. And even though there was some apprehension about how to do it, they were willing to roll up their sleeves. And I applaud them for calling me and say, hey, will you go with me? When I was talking to the folks from Washington State, I said, I can't fly out to Washington every week. I said, but here's what you do. My recommendation was meet with the faith leaders in the African American community. Start there. When I was in sales at UPS, one of our sales strategies or techniques was to develop a relationship, what we called an internal champion. And I said that faith leader can be your internal champion. You start by trying to build a relationship with one. You're not going to win the whole community over. If you, well, let me say it this way. I think it is far more difficult if you say, I want to go address this entire church congregation at one time, than if you say, you know what, I'm going to engage with this faith leader or this school administrator or whatever the case may be, and I'm going to win their trust first. Then they will lead me, because now you have credibility, and they will lead you. They'll be your internal champion because they will recognize the need in their community. So this all goes back to communication and building relationships and building trust. Any other questions, comments?
Does anybody have other ideas of how we can build a trusting community? Because we all play a part in that. And I don't want to call out anybody that's on here, but there are 2 or 3 people that have a very strong connection to their faith community, and they've allowed me to come in, and we've had open conversations and suicide prevention training. And there were several people in that congregation that had lost a Black loved one to suicide. So Kevin, suicide is not racist.
Yeah.
So suicide has touched so many of us. Mental illness touches so many of us. So being able to support each other and open that dialogue up, how do we create a trusting community?
Well, what's true, and again, I started out by saying, I believe there are a lot of superior, I'm sorry.
Somebody else wants to talk.
Oh, go ahead. Yes, please.
I feel called to speak. I became face to face with mental health issues 13 years ago through a child. It was very difficult. It's been difficult for the last 13 years. Mm-hmm. However, I do know that I have to be a spokesperson. I do know that I speak on behalf with ignorance to people out of their mouths when they make comments that are not appropriate in regard to, you know, various things. You're crazy. There's various things. And because of my being a spokesperson in various places, I've come to a place where I've been connected with more people who are dealing with mental illness. And I get calls sometimes from people that are dealing with it. And I just thank God. I am a faith person. Abby knows me. And I thank God that the Lord has given me a place of being able to be respected. In regards to mental health, even across cultures and places, I was at a place 3 months ago, actually almost 4 months ago, and this woman, I was in the state of Texas, and she started to talk about her daughter. She was of I guess Argentina or some other country. I'm not quite sure what her background was, Brazil. But nevertheless, when she started to speak, I knew I was being called to speak to her. Mm-hmm. I have shared with her about NAMI, and I speak very highly of NAMI wherever I go. And I shared with her, I looked online and found out the name of her local chapter, and I've since talked to her since that time. But I believe when as you meant, I didn't hear your whole story about your son, but I do know other people of African descent who have had their children to commit suicide, and it's not pretty. And I've known others from other backgrounds as well. Their children have committed suicide. So all I'm saying is to be open, to have dialogue with people. I have another very close Caucasian friend who her child deals with depression oftentimes, and we pray about it, and we talk about various aspects of this racism. Actually, back around when George Floyd was murdered, she called me and said, "How are you, Gladys?" And I just thank God that I'm believing God for open dialogue about all topics, about racism, about mental health, and about elections, everything that's been systemically against us. As a child, I'm older than you, but I do remember vividly the various times when I saw my TV as a little girl, the hoses and everything that was being put against us as African Americans trying to vote. And to that end, I'm very involved in the election process as well. But I just wanted to speak and let you know there's some among us who are taking a stand and filling a gap. It may not be big, but we're speaking and trying to erase stigmas and stereotypes against people of color, against people that have mental illness, against so many other racial thoughts around our country and our culture and around the world. And so I hope that I have enlightened something in your thoughts, and I'm thankful for you and for the opportunities you had. And you mentioned something else in regard to your education. My parents also had very little education, and I grew up in a town where I didn't really remember we had a mixture of people, but I do remember my first bout of really knowing racism was against me at 12 years old. And so I still remember that, and it hurts. And I do believe what you just said about people do see color. They do. It's not like you're not a different, and that's something we have to respect, because we're all different, and we need to recognize people as being different, and just treat people accordingly. As a cliche, don't judge me by the color of my skin, but by the content of my character. So thank you very much for listening to me this afternoon, and thank you to dear Abby, who does a phenomenal job for Montgomery County, Pennsylvania. Thank you.
Ms. Gladys, thank you for sharing and speaking up and for being here tonight. You know that you mean the world to me. I'm glad that you're here to inspire the conversation further.
Thank you so much.
For my part, what I'm doing is I'm involved in the campaign and I'm involved in voters' rights. Everybody should vote, and in organizations that do that. So hopefully that'll work better than it did 4 years ago. So.
Yeah. Well, thank you. And you know, Miss Gladys, you mentioned something, and Cheryl, I'm going to kind of put these two together. You know, you said something to the extent about your small part. Every little bit helps. You know, I'm one of those people, and I think, Abby, I think it was you who told me you lost an employee, an African-American employee some time ago because they, and I can't remember all the details, they felt they were the only one or something like that. I learned very early on to embrace, not that I liked it, but to embrace being the only one in the room because I couldn't change it at that time. And here's what I mean. My children, my youngest son, quite frankly, is real quick to make excuses when he's not doing well in school and that kind of thing. And he would come home when he was in high school, and it was always, that teacher's racist. And I said, well, wait a minute. What exactly is the problem? You know, and it was either I didn't do my homework, I didn't do well on a test, or whatever the case may be. And he would always say something to the effect that they're always looking at me. And my kid, where I live, like I said, predominantly white, it is a very large high school campus. There are over 7,000 kids on this campus, very few minority kids. And he would always say, I'm tired of them looking at me all the time. And I said, then give them something to look at. Give them something to talk about. You don't have to be defensive. I saw Al Roker from the Today Show wrote a book, and I read a snippet yesterday where he said that one of his very early experiences on the air, I think he said he was in Cleveland, was one of his white peers came into the newsroom one day and said something to the extent that I've been attacked by some of your people. And Al said, well, I knew it was a racist statement. I could have gotten defensive, cursed him out and all that other stuff. Al Roker chose to use humor. And so his response was, he's like, you got attacked by a bunch of weathermen? And so it lightened, it addressed the issue from his perspective, but it lightened the mood at the same time.
Amen.
I say this with humility, but one of my, I'll say my kryptonite for racism has always been excellence. While I have very often in my professional life found myself being the only Black man in the room, quite frankly, I've also found that I was probably one of the best at what I did in the room as well. And I earned the respect of the other people in the room, not by kissing butt, not by trying to talk more properly or anything. I am who I am. And even in this work that I do now, I'm very proud of the work that I've done here at NAMI. I know there are people at NAMI in NAMI, Michigan that have a problem with me being a Black executive director. Here's the deal. Ain't nothing they can do about it. I'm not going anywhere. I'm really good at what I do. People around the state respect me.
So you go with I'm sorry.
People around the state respect me for what I do. So I don't worry about that. I don't carry that on my shoulders. I am who I am. I'm good at what I do. And if you want to be good at what you do, if it crosses my path, you got to come through me to get there. And I don't mean that in a malicious way. I'm just not going to back down. I'm not going to change who I am. I'm going to be me. So the last really quick thing, and Cheryl, you mentioned about voting. You know, unfortunately, the younger generation doesn't feel as strongly about voting as maybe we do. My dad used to take me to the voting booth when I was very small to show me the importance of voting. My wife and I took our children to the voting booth every time. We don't miss an election to show them the importance of voting. People died for me to have that right. People got their heads bashed in for me to have that right. I exercised my right to vote. And I'm really disappointed, quite frankly, in the Black America that does not vote. If you're gonna complain and not be a part of the solution, I don't want to hear it. I don't care what color you are. Do something or shut up. Sorry. Abby, how we?
Your passion is what helps you lead.
Yeah.
I'm hoping that the situation out there, which is so horrible, is going to kind of help people think about voting. Because I think that that's the only way to turn the situation around. So.
Well, to me, you don't have the right to complain if you're not going to get in the fight. When I was a kid growing up, we used to play pickup basketball games, and I would go to a park where there would be 20 guys lined up waiting for the next game. And one of the street rules of pickup basketball is that until you are on the court, nothing you say matters. If somebody called foul or somebody says something on the court, nobody cares about what your opinion is as long as you're on the sideline. But when you're in the game, then your vote counts. So to me, if you want your voice to count, get in the game. Then we'll listen to you. But sitting on the sideline, whining, complaining, and telling everybody about how bad things are and how wrong they are, nobody cares. Looting and rioting. And I know there are other organizations, it's been proven, that are out there. I believe in peaceful protest. I very much believe what Martin Luther King said, that rioting and looting is the voice of the unheard. I get that too. But there's no value to doing that from where I sit.
Do you have suggestions on how we can get our African-American young people to vote?
Barbara, I wish I had the answer. I swear I do. I don't know. I talk to young people all the time. I'm in and out of schools. I talk to my own children. I think we have to just keep encouraging them and helping them understand that your vote does count. I mean, look at the last election, and I don't care what side of the aisle you're on, Democrat or Republican. When you look at the very slim number of votes in the state of Michigan, and again, I don't want to offend anybody. If you're a Trump supporter, that's your deal. But in the state of Michigan, for example, Donald Trump won the state of Michigan by 11,000 votes, but over 250,000 Black people didn't vote. And in the other,
is there any way we can get them to encourage them? I believe that Black people feel that even if they vote, it doesn't count. It doesn't help their situation. What can we do to bring them to the point where they will see that their vote will make a difference?
Again, I think it's a great question. I don't know that I have the answer, but I feel very strongly about this. Just like we're having this conversation, we have to continue the conversation. I think it has to be an all hands on deck conversation. They should be hearing it from their Black faith leaders. They should be hearing it from their parents, grandparents. They should be hearing it from every corner of their community. We should be able, just like the example I just gave you about the state of Michigan. Mm-hmm. It's simple math. When we lost the state by 11,000 votes, but over 250,000 of us failed to vote, that's simple math. Mm-hmm. So I hope that helps. I know that's not the silver bullet.
I have one other thing to interject there.
Yes, ma'am.
When I'm from Philadelphia, where shootings are happening every day. So when the young people are more concerned with not getting shot, not getting involved with the vices, they tend to put voting on the back burner. Is there any, I guess what I'm asking is, a lot of young people do not go to church. Mm-hmm. So they're not going to hear it from their faith leader. Mm-hmm. who can they hear this from? How can we start building communities where youth are informed? Is it, maybe it's the sports? Maybe we should get involved with telling the coaches to, is that?
I think, I think it's an all hands on deck. So yeah, if the kids are wherever, it's just like in mental illness. I learned with my son that I had to meet him where he was. With his schizophrenia, I've got a 22-year-old grown man who had been really quickly. So my son was, he cared very much about his appearance. He was an athlete. He was a 3-sport athlete. He'd take 3 showers a day because every time he worked out, he wanted to take a shower. He wanted to smell good, look good. His definition of cross-dressing was wearing Nike and Adidas at the same time. So that was his thing. One of the symptoms of his illness was he didn't care about that stuff. I mean, I got a 22-year-old man who I had to tell every morning, son, you have to get up and brush your teeth. Son, you have to take a shower. Son, you have to put clean clothes on. You know, those kinds of things. What we have found, and I think this is something that any of you who've been a caregiver for somebody with serious mental illness, you'll understand. We sometimes find ourselves in a situation where, as a parent or caregiver, I would get very frustrated with my son. I didn't understand that symptom of his illness. And I was like, excuse the expression, why the hell do you not understand or remember that you have to get up and brush your teeth every morning? And it became combative. At the same time, what I learned from him was he didn't understand why I didn't understand where he was. Okay. He wasn't purposely, he didn't just decide that I want to have bad breath all day and I want to have bad teeth. It was a symptom of his illness. And so I learned that I had to meet him where he was. And I mean, I literally would have to take a deep breath. There were things that I had to go through with him where I would say, you know what, I can't talk to him about this today because my head is not in the right place. And if I have this conversation, it's going to go badly. So to your point, Ms. Barbara, and I'll go back to the comment I made earlier about growing up in the 70s, this live fast, die young, make a good looking corpse. It's not articulated that way in 2020, but I think that's a lot of what our Black community is living with. We feel like we have no hope. We feel like we have no opportunity. And so we're out here making fast money. We don't value life. You know, you can use all the analogies that, you know, kids think it's Call of Duty and they think if I shoot you in the head, you'll be back tomorrow. All of that is a part of it. But the biggest part of it to me is we don't care. Our young people don't care because we don't feel like we have a chance. We don't feel like we have a future. Now, part of that, quite frankly, comes from home. Part of that is parents teaching their kids that as well. Again, and I'll use my own experience. My dad had a hard time. I know he did. I was with my father when they refused to service, and he wanted to buy my mother a movie camera. This is, of course, back in the 70s. He wanted to buy my mother a movie projector. And we went to a very large, popular mall. We stood there for over an hour. They wouldn't wait on him because he was standing there in his green work pants, Dickies, which are now, you know, real popular. And I said, but they wouldn't wait on him. And I watched it, and he was going to be proud. This was him showing his son how to take care of his wife and set this example. And he was humiliated. He didn't say a word to me, but I could see the look on his face, and he was humiliated. The thing that I value so much about him is he refused to pass that hate and anger on to me. We went to another store. And so I say that to say this, you know, in my life right now, and I live a relatively comfortable life, and please forgive me, I don't mean that, I mean that with humility. I don't mean that with any sense of arrogance. I have contractors and stuff in my house all the time. And the first thing they ask is, who are you? Are you some retired athlete? Are you this and that? They are always surprised to hear, I don't have a college degree. I have some college education, but I don't have a college degree. I'm not an athlete. I'm not an entertainer. I'm none of those things. But I've lived a pretty comfortable life because my father instilled in me that if you're willing to pay the price, there's an opportunity for you. And I've done the same thing with my children. I made it very clear to my kids, I'm not going to take care of you. I had a really good friend ask my wife and I last week how we got our kids out of the house, because we're empty nesters. And he said, how'd you get them to leave? I told him very early on, I'm not going to take care of you. I'm going to give you the gift that my dad gave me, which is the gift of valuing independence, the gift of being able to enjoy whatever quality of life I create for myself. So forgive me for rambling, but I think this goes, yes, it's a voting problem, but it's a cultural problem. We as parents, and we have some time, we're not going to get everybody. It's just like my mission in life is to make sure there's never another suicide. I know I'm not going to get there, but every day I wake up with that focus that anybody who I cross paths with, anybody who needs my help in that area is going to get it. I don't care if I'm up 24 hours a day. We have to have that. We have to give that gift to our kids too. We have to get them to understand to value their life.
That they're worthy. They're worthy of goodness, and they're worthy of hope and a future that they're proud of. And Reverend Steele, it's good to hear your voice. And I just want to share that I think maybe one place that we could go is community groups like Boys and Girls Clubs in the different areas. I know that we've started doing mental health education for middle school kids and had tremendous conversation with young Black and brown boys and girls, and it was great. So being able to add that message of your voice matters and you going to vote matters is maybe something that we can infuse into the messaging that we're already doing. But I think that your question was important to get us all thinking about how we can do that. And it's like Kevin said, it's everywhere.
And I don't think this is as significant as what Abby and Kevin said, but right now, and I don't want to be political about it, but I could just tell you what I do. There's like Pennsylvania Dems, and they're split into different areas, and I'm involved in 4 different areas, but one area I call is into Philadelphia. So, and talking about voting, and so that's a little bit of what you if you want to get involved in doing some of that, you know.
Well, and I think what you said is significant. And it sounds a little cliche, but we have to be the change we seek. I tell young people all the time, Martin Luther King is not getting out of that grave to save us. We have to be the change we seek. We have to be willing to do it ourselves. Like, again, we just lost John Lewis, the last great, freedom rider. He ain't getting out of that grave to help us. He did all he could. Now we have to pick up the torch, and we have to give that to our children. And it's not just about being Black or white. Again, we have to learn to value what we all bring to the table. And I can't devalue myself. I can't take myself out of the game. I'll be a little self-critical again real quickly. And Abby, I think I told you this story. So I'm next to the baby of what were 9 kids. And in late 1998, I took my first trip to Maui. And I came back with my first time whale watching. And I came back with all this video, and I was really excited to show my nieces and nephews this video. My oldest sister, who, if those of you who hear about Detroit, you hear about 8 Mile Road, like the movie Eminem made. Yeah. 8 Mile is the dividing line from the city to the suburbs to the north in Detroit. And there's a street called Telegraph that's the dividing line to the west. There are Black people who don't cross 8 Mile. There are Black people in Detroit who don't cross Telegraph. And so my sister lives in that kind of narrow headspace. And so she walks in the room while I'm showing the kids the video, and she says, "That's some white people stuff." And I said, "Really?" And I thought about it for a minute. I keep in mind, I'm only 35 or so years old at the time. But I said, you know what? I walked up and down the beach for miles every day when I was in Maui. I said, the one thing I never saw? A for whites only sign. I said, I didn't see one. And my point is this: while racism is an issue in this country, it's kind of a two-way street. We have a tendency as Black people to omit ourselves from things in society and say, well, that's white people stuff. We shouldn't do that. That's not for us. When I lived in Toledo, Ohio, they used to have what they call Party in the Park downtown on the riverfront every Friday night. A friend of mine who's also Black, we're both in sales, we were playing basketball at the University of Toledo in the afternoon, and we looked at our watch and said, oh, we got to go because we got to go down to Party in the Park. Now, we were going to be entertaining some clients down there, but our other Black friends at the basketball court said, well, that's not for us. And I said, well, what do you mean? He says, well, the only reason Black people go downtown Toledo is to go to court. And he says, well, they don't have Black acts, they don't have Black music down there. And my response was this: why would they? If there's none of us there, they're not going to invite R&B bands there. But if we go to the city planner and say, we would like to have R&B music played there, or whatever the case may be, and then show up, who says it wouldn't change? There's no reason to change if I'm not there.
Amen.
So we have to, don't get me wrong. Yes, systemic racism has been a problem for a long time. But if we don't become part of the solution, we can't stand on the sideline and wait for somebody to fix it for us and hand it to us. It's not going to happen.
Right.
So,
Did you listen to Barack Obama's speech today? Basically, that's what he said.
yeah, I couldn't listen to all of it. I heard pieces of it because this is my third Zoom call today. Plus, my office is in Lansing, Michigan, which is about an hour and 15 minutes away. So I've been there and back and then did a few Zoom calls today. So I didn't get to hear the whole thing. But I mean, one of the things that, Barack Obama, so let's talk a little bit about reverse racism. Abby, how are we doing on time?
I hope that the Zoom meeting, I don't remember how long I set it for.
Okay.
So if I tell you that we have a little thing that comes up,
Okay.
but, I think that we still have a lot of people engaged with us, and the conversation is important. So as long as
we'll keep going until you guys get bored or cut us off. So I look at Barack Obama. Barack Obama took a lot of heat from the African American community while he was in office. He didn't do enough for Blacks. I've heard leaders, Jesse Jackson was quoted as saying that he took some shots. Here's the deal. What did we really expect? Did we really think that he was going to be able to go in there and use the office of the presidency to undo 400 years of racism? That just wasn't realistic. And I think Barack Obama is intelligent enough to understand that this is a journey, again, that we have to go on together. This can't be us versus them. This can't be Black versus white. This can't be you've had your knee on our neck for 400 years, so it's time for us to change roles, and now you let us put our knee on your neck. It's not going to work that way. I cannot punish you for things that have happened over the last 400 years, last few decades. I can't punish you for that. And I saw that. I was on another call and somebody asked that. They said, Black people expect us to pay for the sins of our ancestors. I can't ask you to do that. I can ask you to help stop that process and stop benefiting from that, as we call it, white privilege. But we have to move forward. We can't, I know it's painful, but we can't drag 400 years along with us. We'll never make any progress.
it's a big ball and chain.
Yeah. So, but I think, again, my contribution is this. My contribution has been being willing to be the only one if I'm the only one. And you can't see this. I have this in my office. It's the picture of a black man reaching back to pull another black man up behind. We have to be willing to do that. I told Abby a story about, and I'll tell it really briefly. I was a global sales manager for UPS in 1997. I was promoted and relocated. They spent money to move me back to Detroit to become the account manager for Ford Motor Company. At that time, Ford Motor Company was the second largest manufacturing company in the world. I was tasked with, at that time, Ford, for what you see on the street, we call small package, those little brown trucks. Ford had a transportation budget of about $300 million for that business annually. UPS at the time was only getting about $8 million of that money. When I came back, they tasked me with winning a $100 million air contract. And so I said, okay. Within my, little after my first year, I realized that the decision maker that I was working with was never going to give us that contract. And it was because he had a liking for one of our competitors. Wasn't anything unethical or anything like that. But when we bid on the contract, quite frankly, I knew my rates and my service was better than my competitor, but he was not going to allow us to win that contract. So I sat down with my manager and said, look, I have to get above this guy. I have to, this was a, let's call him, he worked in a district office. I needed to get to the glass tower at Ford World Headquarters. Now, let me tell you about my boss real quick. My boss was a racist. Knew it from the beginning. When I was appointed to my position, it was very unusual. My regional manager appointed me to that position. So my boss did not get to pick me. I was picked for him and told, this is the guy who's going to take on this account. But my regional manager arranged for me to have a meeting with him and kind of introduce myself and break the ice. At that meeting, when I was telling him about myself, I described myself as a non-traditional student, which means I'm an older guy going back to school trying to finish my degree. But his response was, oh, so does that mean you're a black guy that didn't play basketball for your school? That was in the first 10 minutes of my conversation with him. And over the course of a couple years, it just got worse. He criticized my wanting to coach my kids' little league team, what kind of car I had. There were lots of little daggers that he threw at me. And quite frankly, as long as I didn't feel that those things were hurting my career, you just keep moving. There came a point in 1999 where I met a gentleman who happened to be black. He was the senior vice president of what they call materials planning and logistics at Ford. Basically, he was responsible for moving anything at Ford. Parts, cars, the whole deal. And while he and I, this is kind of stuff you hear about in movies, while he and I were on a tour at UPS, we got into a debate about who was the largest user of rail in the country. And he felt that, you know, we move cars by rail and people thought UPS was driving packages across country. And I was like, no, we put them on a train in California. We don't touch them again until they hit New York. It moves faster, it's cheaper, all of those things. From that conversation, we created what became at that time the largest deal in UPS history. It was worth over $1 billion a year. And it was the first of its kind deal where UPS, a small package company, was going to be responsible for delivering cars, whole cars. And it even made the Wall Street Journal twice. My manager pulled me aside one night, and I'm keeping this short. There's a lot to this, but keeping it short. My manager pulled me aside one night and he said, so what do you expect out of this? And I said, I didn't expect anything. I'd never gone to him and said, hey, you owe me a raise, you owe me a promotion, nothing. I was like, let's just get the work. I was all about getting the work done. So he then told me, he said, well, I see this as a couple of brothers trying to hook each other up, and I'm not going to allow that to happen. And I said, okay, what does that mean? What that meant was he removed me from the account and gave it to somebody else. So now let's talk about what that cost me. What do you get when you're in sales, when you make $1 billion sales? You made and it's not a singular bill, it was $1 billion a year. It was a deal that was so big that UPS and Ford created a joint venture company called UPS Autogistics. It was 80% profit because all we did was let Ford hook its trains up to our trains when we passed through town. So we didn't build buildings. We didn't have to hire a bunch of employees. This was all profit for UPS. I will tell you the natural progression is at some point you get promoted, because I have friends who did much less who are in the corporate office now. But here's what it cost me. When we talk about generational wealth, that's something that would have set my family up for life, because that next promotion for me would have put me in a position that they called division manager at the time, which means I got stock options every year. UPS is a pretty valuable company. Right now, I think their annual sales are $70, $80 billion a year. It would have set my family up for life. And that was 20 years ago. So God knows where my career would have gone since then. But here's the thing. Here's what it cost me immediately. My wife left me. UPS fired me because I refused to say no. I tried to go through the chain of command. And I said, look, I'm not asking for anybody's job or anything. I just want him to stop doing what he's doing. UPS told me, you just got to live with it. You got to suck it up. So I said no, and I went and got an outside attorney and I sued him. My wife told me I was crazy, that I couldn't take on a company that size. So she left me. I lost my house. My relationship with my children were severely strained. They literally stole my life, and I had to start all over. And my guilt, and this is something, if you work hard enough, you can look it up. I had not done anything illegal, immoral, or unethical. My crime was being more successful than my racist boss wanted me to be. That was my crime. That's all I had done. So that, when we talk about institutional racism, that's institutional racism. But UPS is one of those companies. It's funny because my wife still works for UPS, my current wife. But it's interesting because 2 months ago, UPS was one of those companies that put out one of those fabulous statements that said, we believe in equity and inclusion, and we're going to donate $3 million to Black Lives Matter and all that. They stole more than $3 million away from me. Keep in mind, this is a company that makes $70 billion a year. $3 million is nothing. All of these companies out here making these racial equity statements like Nike, Adidas, UPS, it's ridiculous. We as a country need to be holding them accountable and saying, what are you doing? Because UPS made $3 million since I've been talking. That's nothing. So that's the UPS story.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you, Abby, for bringing Kevin on, but I have to leave. But it's been a very interesting conversation.
I look forward to many more with you.
All right, then. God bless.
Next time I'm in Philly, I'll look you up.
Okay.
I know it's close to the 6 o'clock hour, and I want to be conscious of your time too, and I really appreciate you guys being here. Is there any other questions or anything for me?
This is Gladys again. I wanted to just make a comment about the stigmas for mental health and mental illness. And I believe some of those stigmas have been kind of eliminated to some degree by spokespeople from the sports fields that have spoken about their mental illness in various sports. And also in the entertainment with Kanye West acknowledging he has
Huge.
So,
Yes.
so that helps. That helps a lot, and I think that might be someone in the area of the racism. And one of the places that I believe where racism exists, I just read the article yesterday. In the community of faith, white Christians are typically, they're saying, a lot more racist. Like in Barr, he's and some other people in the cabinet for the current president.
Yeah.
Or they're eliminating and minimalizing what's been going on. And this, when they give the numbers, they say, oh yeah, Black people have been killed, but not as many as white people. Well, we're in a minority, so it just doesn't really add up. So I'm thinking that some of the people that are speaking out and that have a voice, not so much that they're more visible in the society and in the world, that if they're speaking out about these various aspects, and in the pulpit where topics need to be discussed beyond salvation, that might help as well. And because our buildings are closed, a lot of congregations are meeting on Zoom meetings or live streaming, and actually more people are being reached now with messages, because on a typical Sunday, I might attend 3 or 4 services because I can do that. I'm not in my pulpit for the designated hour and a half, 2 hours. I'm visiting churches, and even through the week, I may go back and visit another sermon, and I just think that there are voices that can be heard to make these topics more out there. And in regard to the other person with the voting issue, when I was talking about the small gap, I was out today for the first time going into a building. For the last 4 months, I have been in no building other than my home, but I had to go to a doctor's appointment. And while I was out, I had to go to the post office. And I had thought about these places where you could put voter registration forms, and I thought about public places like libraries and post offices and places. So while I was at the doctor's office, I had to go to the post office. And I asked one of the postal carriers, one of the clerks there, about taking some voter registration forms. And I thought she was taking them personally. I had some in my car because I'm on a personal voter registration drive. And so I took the last ones that not quite the last, I had a few left, but she said, I'll take 20. But when I went back inside, she said, well, we used to always have these in the post office. So if any one of us on this line can get voter registration forms and put them in your post offices, and as the other speaker that spoke about how do we get the young people, just talk to them. I'm talking to anybody and everybody. If I talk to a stranger on the telephone, if I'm calling about a business, I'll say, are you registered to vote?
Exactly.
In my community, I go for a walk every day. I ask people as I pass them, are you registered to vote? And I carry the voter registration forms, because we cannot change unless we get involved and do whatever it is within your ability. And so thank you for listening.
No, thank you. And I know Ms. Spector had her hand raised.
I was just going to say one thing. Hi, everyone.
Hi.
Hi, I'm from Montgomery County, and I'm here. I'm a mom of a 21-year-old who's had a recent psychotic episode, and we're waiting for diagnosis. It's probably going to be in the schizophrenia, bipolar. So thank you. And I'm sorry for your loss, Kevin. And this is a really interesting discussion. I just want to say now, I know it's late, and I'm not being political here, but I so appreciate this discussion about voting and everything about it. And I'm not trying to be, as I said, political, but somebody mentioned the cabinet and you're talking about faith, and I happen to be Jewish, and I don't mean to compare that to the really wonderful, I think, what's going on now with finally some discussion about the horrific racism that this country has silently stood on for so many years. I happen to be Jewish, and make no mistake about it, I think that we have to call out what is going on in this country, which is the roots of fascism. And there is really no other way to call it. And that's not just my opinion. I mean, this is the opinion of constitutional scholars and people who identify as Republican. And, this is not a Democrat and Republican issue.
No.
It isn't. And this is the roots of fascism, however we spin it. And it's not just because of ancestry in the Holocaust. And, we've had our own Holocaust in this country on the backs of, with slavery, as far as I'm concerned. But anyway, I just wanted to say that. And I don't think it's about dancing around niceties about let's avoid politics. And we are talking about fascism here, and it is creeping in. And so thank you all for caring. And Ms. Gladys, about the voting that you're talking about.
Yes, ma'am.
We are talking about the very survival of democracy. You know, and I'm no patriot, but my dad fought in World War II and really went through a lot of suffering in his life over that. And he's gone now. But anyway, thanks for doing this and for all you do. It's a wonderful group. That's all.
Well, and thank
Jill.
you too. We're all in this together.
And let us know how we can help in any way.
Yeah.
You know, in Pennsylvania, at least, and in many other states, there's vote by mail. You don't even have to have an absentee ballot excuse, and you could request it online today. So that's a very easy thing to do.
Maybe. Trump's suing Pennsylvania still, isn't he? No, he is. We're one of the states.
All night.
Yeah. Anyway, scary.
So everybody, thank you so much for making this a priority in your day. Kevin Fischer, my friend, I am so thankful for your presence and your knowledge and sharing of yourself with all of us, and inspiring some conversations that I really do hope that we can get started locally and make some changes. I would love to have specific, just individual support groups for communities of color. We can all hang out and have fun together, but if people want that, I would really love to be able to provide that to our communities, because we are stronger together, but sometimes people want to be with their people. So,
Well, Abby, thank you for having me. Thank you all for your time and taking the time to be here today and have this conversation. Abby has my contact information. If there's anything anybody wants to reach out to me for, please feel free. But I'll end with this, and it's one of NAMI's favorite taglines. We are better together. I absolutely believe that.
Definitely.
And if we keep pushing that positive message, I really believe we will become a better country. So thank you all. Have a wonderful night. Be safe. Wear your mask. And I hope to see you the next time I'm in the great state of Pennsylvania.
Great. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye.
bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you, Abby.
It was a pleasure.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Will you send out his contact information?